Let's dive into the Pittsburgh Steelers' top prospects here. We are less than a week away from the draft. We have heard everything from wide receiver, cornerback, offensive tackle, draft a center in the first round. Don't draft a center in the first round. Maybe you go with this center. Maybe you go with that one. What if this guy is available? I dropped the name Byron Murphy the other day, and everybody's like, what? Yep, nope. I think it's a real name to watch if he's floating around there. You just finished 60 player reports and 230 big board rankings. Who are your top guys for the Pittsburgh Steelers in the 2024 draft class?
It's always really funny when I'm on the podcast and then you're asking me about the Steelers prospects, because my answer has not changed since the time we have started talking about the draft. It is still Oregon center Jackson Powers Johnson, and in my honest, he has one of the most complete sets of film that I have seen out of a center. He just has constant displacement at the first and second level. He pulls effectively. He's strong on reach blocks. There's so much that he can do that you don't have to like protect him. And that's one of those things about a center. Like if you are not gonna like when it comes to centers nowadays, so many like defensive schemes are trying to line their pass rushers up in the A gap to line up over the center. Yeah. And I don't have concerns about Jackson Powers Johnson having to take on like Jadeveon Clowney on a power rush or, up the middle one-on-one. And that's like important. I think Powers Johnson is the top prospect for me. He will remain that way for me. Obviously, the Steelers are potentially thinking elsewhere with how their pre-draft visits are going. Maybe they might be changing up their draft strategy. I would definitely have very little complaints if they end up settling for someone like Graham Barton in the first round, who is one of the top, relative athletic scoring athletes to grace the center position. There's just a little bit of questions about cleaning up his hand usage and keeping his chest clean. But there is a relatively strong profile there, and the advanced analytics behind a pick like that, I can definitely get on board.
Let me ask this while you're sticking with the centers, you might be the only one left on, or at least outside of. I think the fan base is still thinking Jackson Powers Johnson. You get a lot of analysts that are saying Graham Barton. Why are you Jackson Powers Johnson over Graham Barton here?
So the reason I'm JPJ over Graham Barton is specifically because I think there is less projection work that I have to do with JPJ versus a Graham Barton. Now, I've read Dane Brugler's The Beast Guide, and there has been a little bit of an injury history potentially with Jackson Powers Johnson. Dealt with a few concussions, had groin and hip injuries, hamstring injuries as well. And he has been able to fight through most of these injuries and be able to play as effectively as he can. So I'm not too concerned about it. And what I have noticed, and I kind of pay attention a little bit to this, I was always curious about why Jackson Powers Johnson was wearing the helmet that he does. Like, it's one of the newer models, because whenever I see a player wearing the newer model, I'm like, okay, they must have suffered a few concussions, or because it usually ends up, leading to that a little bit. But I have zero complaints with someone like Graham Barton. I have them like separated differently, tiered differently, but I think they're both like really phenomenal players. If you want to go with like a tackle in the first round, I do think there are guys that you can get later at center that can still be of great use, but I think it's just, to me, JPJ is that guy I'm projecting to be a future all-pro, potentially the best at his position. I don't want to overthink it. I want to be on the show and give you something new, but I want to just be like, no, it's the same. It's how I've felt for a while. And Jackson Powers Johnson, he's my guy.
I mean, don't feel bad you're cutting against the grain a little bit here. Yeah. Not just in terms of what the Steelers want, but Jackson Powers Johnson has fluctuated, I feel like, all over the end of that first round for the past, month and a half, 2 months. Like what makes you confident that it's not a reach at 20? Like, is it something where they could trade back for and still land Jackson Powers Johnson?
I think considering the potential medicals with JPJ and the fact we've seen guys like Kuiper say that what he's hearing from the league is the centers might go a little later, but then you read that someone like Zach Frazier might go in the first round according to Peter Schrager, and that Graham Barton's going to be the first center off the board. So you're getting a little bit of mixed signals there. It does give me a signal though that JPJ is more of a trade back opportunity type of guy. And I think with teams like Buffalo potentially wanting to move up for a receiver like a Brian Thomas Jr., I mean, it would make a lot of sense to move back and get your best player available at that point. I think it would really work out in the Steelers' favor. They could also trade back and potentially get their top tackle as well. Armarius Mims is a little bit of in an interesting spot because there's been instances where he didn't even finish games half the time and he would have to come in and out, rotate with guys because he was dealing with injuries so much. And I think that is really concerning if you want to go with a first round tackle. But I totally get the upside of Armarius Mims because he's one of those guys who's just so stout as a pass protector. He's got one of the best anchors you'll see. He just consistently sits on power, never gets moved back on contact. I don't necessarily think he's a technician. It's just that he's so smooth at being able to mirror rushers and just being ready for them that he can just win with his level of power and athleticism.
Do you see Mims as a guy? Is he a reach at 20? That was my question for you.
It would technically be a reach on my board, but it's a lot of contextual arguments of injury history with him. Do you feel comfortable taking the risk if he ends up playing as long as he can and he doesn't have issues with injuries? That pick could be a slam dunk. Mims, the inexperience, people conflate inexperience with rawness. If there's any aspect of Armarius Mims that is raw, it is his ability as a run blocker, which he tends to not get as low in his pad level, and he tends to lunge and reach a lot at the first level, and it's something he's got to really work on. But when you talk about displacement, he has that in droves, and there's a lot to work with in that regard. So Mims, you got a solid pass protector and you got a promising run blocker at the same time, but you have to factor in the injuries to go with that as well. And I guess if we're being fair, you do the same with a guy like Jackson Powers Johnson. Maybe that's why the Steelers are leaning towards a guy like Graham Barton.
I get that. When it comes to, do you see any, I've been told that, I don't know, roughly 85% chance. It'd be real surprising if the Steelers went a different direction than offensive line in the first round. There's a handful of guys. I'm excited to ask you about this guy. Where's Cooper DeJean on your big board? Do you see him as a guy that if he's sitting there at 20, you can't pass up? Because I do. And I've been told that the Steelers might think the same way.
So Cooper DeJean is interesting. I'm very mixed on how I view him as a corner or safety prospect. Mm-hmm. I think as a safety, I am a little more comfortable with his overall projection, just because I think in terms of his man-to-man coverage, I think he's a little bit more raw in how he reads the hips. He's a little prone to opening the gate a little bit too often. He's a very smooth player. He's very fluid. He's clearly got speed. He has the athleticism. There's no issues there with Cooper DeJean in the slightest. But I think if you're asking where his skill set might fit best, the way he comes down, defends the run. I've seen him take on pulling blockers, be able to blow up plays, and still get create openings for his teammates. I say to myself, that's that could fit really well at safety. He could be a strong off-man quarters type of guy that you match on slot receivers, and I think that type of player works really well for what the Steelers want to pair with a guy like Minkah Fitzpatrick. So if you want to go that direction, I definitely would feel pretty comfortable. He's about 26 on my board. I have Terrion Arnold and Quinion Mitchell ahead of them.
Yeah.
But
yeah, those are guys you can't pass. Quinion Mitchell is there's no chance he makes it to 20. But I remember sitting there at the NFL Combine and being told, like, if there's one guy that is available for the Pittsburgh Steelers that they wouldn't even think about, it would take them 0 seconds to put his name in for their selection. It was Quinion Mitchell. And that just makes all the sense in the world. I want to ask you one more before we go into the trade up versus trade back. Wide receivers. Where do you see the Steelers going wide receivers? Where are your top prospects for them in this draft?
So my top wide receiver prospects for the Steelers, I would say the one that they are highly considering the most at 51 has to be Ricky Pearsall. Ricky Pearsall is a just absolutely strong talent at the wide receiver position. His hands, his ability to contort his body in the air, the way he can create separation in and out, outside and in the slot. There are great aspects to his game with being able to block as well. He fits well with the Arthur Smith type of profile. I would say that he's a tremendous fit for what they ask their receivers to do. And I think he is a player that would be a slam dunk at 51, as far as I'm concerned. Now, you've asked me a little bit on a trade up. If they want to trade up and take one of the big three receivers in like Rome Odunze, Malik Nabers, Marvin Harrison Jr., you would see zero complaints from me, even though they would basically be punting on some of their biggest needs. Yeah. But, you know, when it comes to players like that, I totally get like why they would want to, you know, do that. But I doubt that they'll end up doing that in the slightest.
So there's no chance that it's a first-round guy? That there's no chance there is a Brian Thomas or A.D. Mitchell in their future?
I don't believe so, no.
Why not?
I when it comes to A.D. Mitchell, I think he is a strong man-to-man separator. There's a lot of good aspects with that part of his film, but he's a little bit on the raw side in terms of zone coverage. The effort concerns are very interesting with his tape because there are times where he is like, he knows he is very late into the progression. He knows Quinn Ewers is going to not be able to get to him at that point. So he might not, you know, he might like pull up on a play for a little bit. And some people have issues with that and some do not. Xavier Worthy does a little bit of the same thing. It could be more part of the Texas scheme as opposed to what they're at, as opposed to like a true effort thing. Because if you go back to his tape at Georgia, he's constantly hustling his butt off.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, let's dive into. Oh, you got more? Go ahead, Steven.
Well, Brian Thomas. Any thoughts?
Brian Thomas
Jr. Is Steven's guy. That's if you had to say who's the Steelers' first round pick. Steven's going Brian Thomas.
I like Brian Thomas. He's a really solid prospect. He's a guy I would be very comfortable with them sticking and picking at that spot. I think he is strong in terms of his vertical profile. He's got a developing route profile. I think he sits well in the chair on top of stopping routes. Like he can run those types of routes. I think there's potential for a complete type of profile. I do think he needs to clean up a little bit of his attack in terms of like how he attacks the ball in the air consistently. I do think he doesn't always attack to its highest point when it always merits. And I think there's a little bit of work to be done in that regard. But overall, I'm pretty pleased with what I've seen from Brian Thomas. I actually, on a comp spectrum, I compared him to Tyrell Williams and Demaryius Thomas. Like he's on that type of spectrum. And I think you could see him reach one of those outcomes. Tyrell Williams is a very interesting player because he was actually a very like notable player that like outperformed expectations for a while, and injuries kind of ruined the end of his career. And I think a player like that is valuable to what an offense can bring. And I think someone like Brian Thomas, that vertical profile that he brings is so appealing to a team that throws, you know, vertically like the Steelers do, or a team like the Buffalo Bills, who really love, are looking for a potential Gabe Davis replacement in that regard. And
yeah,
not just that, but Stephon Diggs.
I was going to say a little bit of everybody. Did everybody see that? Apparently Brian Thomas is going to be better than Malik Neighbors and Marvin Harrison Jr. because FanDuel released their top 20 wide receiver rankings or something, and Rome Odunze is ranked 9th or 8th and ahead of George Pickens and Zay Flowers and DeAndre Hopkins and a whole bunch of other good names. And then Brian Thomas is the only other incoming rookie on that list at 11, which my immediate thought went, did they forget? Did they forget about Marvin Harrison Jr. and Malik? Are those guys just not? I guess I'm wrong. But that's how they see them. We'll see.